I'm going to present a recent paper that I published in collaboration with Sydney Garcia and Jamil Zaki at the Stanford Social Neuroscience Lab, and Golajay Golahari and Jennifer Eberhardt of Stanford Spark. So the United States has the 5th highest incarceration rate in the world and the highest of all NATO countries. And it's estimated that right now, 1 out of every 100 people in the United States is in a prison. Recidivism rates are also unusually high in the United States. A study conducted from 2005 to 2014 found that 83% of formerly incarcerated people were rearrested within 9 years of their release. This suggests that the incarceration system is not that effective at reducing crime. And highly punitive measures like the death penalty have been proposed as crime deterrents. However, no evidence exists to support this. In fact, the data indicate just the opposite, where states with the death penalty have a higher per capita murder rate than those without the death penalty. A large recent meta-analysis of 750 reports found that degree-awarding college education programs inside of prisons can reduce recidivism by 27% and increase employment among formerly incarcerated people by 11%. However, programs like these are often undercut by stigma, and stigma occurs at multiple levels. For example, public stigma might be ignited to garner votes against such programs in the media, and self-stigma might deter someone from signing up for a program, and structural stigma might look like policies that reduce funding for such programs. Stigmatization increases feelings of psychosocial distance from one another. And as psychosocial distance from a rule violator increases, Tang and colleagues found here that the willingness to punish someone who's violated a rule increases. Media interventions have been effective at reducing stigma. For example, a 2-year randomized control trial in a really large population found that when people share stories about their personal experiences with their mental health conditions, that there's a reduction in mental health stigma and increased access to care. Another study from Jamil's lab found that charitable donations increased towards stigmatized outgroups after watching a play that depicted those outgroup narratives. So basically, we don't exist in a close space with people that we are psychologically distant from, and so we usually gain information about them through media. So media can really influence stigma and bias. However, these interventions require a lot of infrastructure and have small reach. But Hollywood already has the infrastructure and the audience reach. So we asked in this study, can a Hollywood feature film, that depicts the experiences of incarcerated individuals, could it enhance people's empathic understanding of and compassion towards formerly incarcerated people, as well as increase their support for criminal justice reforms? And the film that we used here is Just Mercy, which is based on the novel by attorney Brian Stevenson, who defended this man right here, Walter McMillan, who was wrongfully convicted of murder and placed on death row. In order to assess empathic accuracy, we first expanded the Stanford Emotional Narratives dataset to include real-life stories told by formerly incarcerated men. These stories about 1 to 3 minutes long, and they were all negative emotional stories. We focused on men because men make up more than 90% of the U.S. prison population. So we collected stories from 40 different people. Our storytellers were all formerly incarcerated and recent or current college students, and they were over the age of 18 years old. 20 of our storytellers self-identified as Black, and 20 of our storytellers self-identified as white. After each story, the storyteller watched their video and used a slider to rate how they felt moment by moment while they were telling their story. And you can see here an example of what our participant was speaking about in this story. He says, I was playing cards with my dad, and all of a sudden his chair fell back and he wasn't moving. A lot of the stories that are featured in our data set have to do with the death of a family member or the death of a pet. We enrolled a large nationally representative sample of participants for our online study who had never seen the film Just Mercy or our control films and who had never been incarcerated nor work in law enforcement. And our participants were automatically pseudo-randomized to a treatment or control group in a manner that balanced groups by 2 levels of gender, race, class, and political ideology. Our participants were spread across the U.S. and across the political spectrum. All of our participants first completed a pre-intervention baseline assessment of their beliefs and attitudes towards the criminal justice system. And this involved 20 statements where they rated how much they agreed or disagreed with them. For example, one of the statements was the death penalty should be an option for the most serious crimes. Another was we should use our tax money to fund educational programs for those in prisons. And finally, the last one was incarcerated people, including those convicted of committing serious crimes or capable of transformation. We also assessed their baseline empathic accuracy for storytellers. And to do this, we used our storyteller videos, and people rated what they thought the storyteller was feeling moment by moment on the same scale that the storyteller rated themselves. And importantly here, we show 8 videos from our set, 4 featuring Black storytellers, 4 featuring white, and the storyteller videos are labeled here as either formerly incarcerated or as a non-traditional college student. And these labels were crossed and counterbalanced across race. And this is important here because first, all of our storytellers were truly formerly incarcerated and truly students. And so we are just highlighting one aspect of their identity here to see if we can get a selective effect in which we are actually changing specifically empathic accuracy and compassion towards the formerly incarcerated. And then if you remember, the storytellers here rate on the same scale. And so in order to assess their empathic accuracy, we compared the observers' ratings, their performance on this task, with the storyteller's self-rating. So you can see here an example from one video, the ratings through time. The storyteller rating themselves is this thick red line here, and then all the participant ratings are plotted behind it. And in order to assess how accurate a person was being, what we did was take the root mean squared error across this trace between the observer and the storyteller's ground truth rating. Lastly, participants then rate how much compassion they felt towards each storyteller. Okay, now our participants watch one of 3 films. If they were in the intervention group, they watched Just Mercy. If they were in the control group, they either watched the movie Moneyball or Concussion. Both are engaging control films with underdog narratives, and importantly, they don't address incarceration and aren't necessarily political. Finally, all participants complete the beliefs and attitudes survey again, as well as the empathic accuracy and compassion task, but they do this with different storytellers, and the storyteller identities are counterbalanced across people. Participants had 1 to 3 days to complete both visits, which helped to reduce fatigue and demand characteristics. First, I'm going to show you the results of the empathic accuracy task. Plotted here are the post versus pre-intervention difference scores of participants' overall empathic accuracy towards formerly incarcerated people after watching the intervention film for the orange bar or after watching the control films for the blue bar. And this effect of the film was specific towards storytellers labeled formerly incarcerated rather than college students. In a linear mixed effects model that treated participant intercepts as random effects, we found a significant 3-way interaction among visit, film condition, and storyteller label on empathic accuracy. And these results are consistent when controlling for storyteller race, as well as when controlling for the participants' race, gender, and socioeconomic status. So we see here that Just Mercy did work to improve empathic accuracy and empathic understanding towards specifically formerly incarcerated individuals, and that this effect is significant in the intervention group, but not in the control group. Interestingly, though, compassion did not change as a function of the film or of storyteller label. And this is true also when controlling for storyteller race, as well as participant race, gender, and socioeconomic status. Next, we created a summary metric based on the 20 beliefs and attitudes questions and compared it pre-post and between groups using a linear mixed effects model with participant intercepts treated as random effects. And we found that a significant interaction between visit and film condition exists on support for reform. That is, that after watching Just Mercy, participants were more supportive of criminal justice reform. You see this bar goes up. Relative to participants who watched the control film. This interaction remains significant again when controlling for participant race, gender, and socioeconomic status. And in particular, we found that it really did decrease support for the death penalty. It's a big drop here, while increasing support for things like expunging of convictions after time served, the funding of educational programs, and the reallocating of tax dollars from policing to education and mental health programs. Finally, we tested if these effects were influenced by people's pre-existing political ideologies, and we found that though right-wing ideologies had a lower baseline support for reform, I guess you see over here the conservative and people in the other right group, which were mostly libertarians, all groups increased by equal amounts after watching the intervention film. Everybody goes up the same amount. That is, there was no significant interaction between visit and political ideology. And just to note here, other left includes people that identify as socialist, communist, and anarchist. So to summarize, participants who watched the intervention film demonstrated improved empathic understanding of storytellers labeled formerly incarcerated. This is more like a cognitive empathy. They also increased their support for comprehensive criminal justice reform across the board. And these effects were consistent whether you were a left-wing or a right-wing participant. And notably, the intervention did not alter feelings of compassion. So why does Just Mercy work? We think that there's a few reasons. One idea is that it's a true story, so people really pay attention to this and apply what they learned here to their real lives. It's also engaging and it has a very transportative narrative so people can imagine what it's like to experience such a thing. And finally, it might also work by reducing social distance or stigma between the observer and formerly incarcerated people, rather than just tugging at heartstrings and or by changing feelings of compassion. The idea is that this film is giving people new information that they can then use to blunt the effects that stigma might have, or reduce stigma, which might blunt their ability to empathize with formerly incarcerated people. And for future directions, we are testing the durability of these effects through time right now. We're also looking into what features of the film are most important to drive these effects. And we're testing if we can predict whether changes in support for reform can actually be predicted from people's brain activity while watching the film. And finally, I just want to conclude by putting these findings within the context of current events. There's actually less support for the death penalty in America today than ever before, with Gen Z really giving it the lowest level of approval. And empathy interventions like ours probably help to support changes like this through time, mostly by reducing public stigma and self-stigma. However, it's possible that empathy might not be enough and that we need to put a focus on structural stigma in order to have lasting real-world reform. Because today, despite massive public disapproval, there has been an expansion to federal power over the death penalty, reinstating it for incarcerated people who were previously removed from death row, and expanding its application to drug offenses, and increasing the power of the federal government to seek the death penalty for incarcerated people in states where the death penalty is actually legal. Programs do exist, though, like the Equal Justice Initiative that was founded by Bryan Stevenson, which provide legal representation to people who have been unfairly sentenced and challenge the death penalty and excessive punishment, and provide re-entry assistance to formerly incarcerated people. So I think it's important for us to keep in mind that we should target also structural stigma and study that as well in our future work. Thank you very much for your time and your attention. Please feel free to contact me at my email provided there, and to check out the work from my new lab as well as Jamil and Jennifer's labs at Stanford. Thank you.